Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to be talking about JavaScript primitive types. Okay, so what that really means is just all the different types that JavaScript has to offer that we can work with in our code. Alright, so we're going to be going into detail into each type, except for these last two, which is big int and symbol. I've personally never had to work with these in my experience, so I'm going to really focus on these five: number, string, boolean, null, and undefined. And we're going to be going into detail what is a primitive type and what are their properties, right? And how are they different than non-primitive types, which is what an example of a non-primitive is an object or function. So one thing I want to mention before I get started, the concepts that I'm going to talk about is coming from this book that I've read recently called Just JavaScript. And this is actually created by Dan Abramov and his team, he worked with. And I really want to just mention this is a fantastic book. It has like 10 modules, attempts to build your mental models about some of the basics in JavaScript, okay? And one of the basics it talks about is primitive types. And this video is not sponsored or anything by this book. I just want to spread the knowledge and maybe fill in those knowledge gaps that this book also is doing for the people that have read them. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is mentioned in this book. Cool. So I'm going to open up the browser. Inside the browser, I just created an HTML page and opened it, and then I'm just going to work in the console. I'm going to use a type of method here, and whenever I do the type of 7, it's going to give me this type number. So that's the first one we're going to work with. The number type deals with what you think, working with numbers. Okay, any type of calculations, displaying numbers, whatever. That's what you use them for. And what I want to say here is there's not much to it, but just think of this. One of the concepts that the book creates is this JavaScript, think of it as a universe. And these types already exist in the universe. It's nothing that we create or anything. It comes with the universe, I would say. This type of number, it has values, okay? So it has 1, 2, 3, all the way up to whatever the limitation is as for an int or for a number type, okay? Not int. And all these values already exist in the universe. Now, whenever I do this, var test equal to 7, okay, and test is now set to 7. What this is doing, now I said that the number 7 already exists in the universe. So the first point I want to mention is that variables are not values, okay? We set these are values, and we set the value to the variable, okay? We assign it to the variable. So what I want to say is variables point to values. So now if I was to change the assignment to 9, now test is set to 9. So it points to another value in the universe, which is 9. All right? And this is the same for every type that you have. All right, so that's really it for number. Let's go to string. So if I do this, it'll give you a type of string. All right, and if you noticed here, I didn't include parentheses. So it's not required for these primitive types to include parentheses. But there is one that you do need to set it for, and I'll mention that later in the video. Okay, so coming to string. One thing that a lot of developers have a confusion on is that I see in the articles is they say everything in JavaScript is an object, and that's something that the book talks about, and that's simply not true. It's a misconception. Whenever I have var test and I set that to string, this is not an object. Okay. What the thing people get confused about, then how come we get to have access to these methods, which in turn makes it an object? So during runtime, what happens is it will wrap this variable around the string object, okay, which contains all these properties, which are either methods or, I think most of these, all of these are methods, I believe. So that's what happens. And then right after that line, that function gets executed, it kind of unwraps. So it's no longer an object anymore. It goes back to its primitive type, which is a string in this case. All right. I hope that makes sense, guys. All right. So another thing I want to mention about primitive types, and it's most commonly confused with strings, is I have test here, right? They are immutable. What does it mean when I say immutable? I think it's a word that people might get confused about. When I say immutable, it means they do not have the ability to change. Okay, they cannot change. It's impossible to change them. So in our JavaScript universe, all the strings possible that you want to create, they already exist. You're just pointing the variable to that string. So this already exists, and you cannot manipulate this value. Okay, you cannot change this value to something else. This will always be there. If I do this test.substring substr, and I want to only extract, I only want to get the first two letters. You might have heard I use the word extract there. That's what it's doing. Okay, it's not modifying the original value. Okay, which the variable test is pointing to. It's modifying. It's only extracting the from the value, and it's returning this value which already exists. Now that doesn't stop you from doing this. Okay, you can reassign the variable to this value, but just know that this is not modifying the original value, which is string. I really want to drive that point because that was a really well explained in the book that's about strings. What do we have next? We have boolean. Okay, so the next point I want to drive here is for boolean, there's only two values, true and false. Okay, so only one of these exists in the universe, one true and one false. So whenever I do this, var test equal to true, and then I do var test 2 equal to true, these two variables are pointing to the same value. Okay, they're not pointing to two different values. There's only one true that exists in the universe. So that's the next point I wanted to drive. Boolean is pretty self-explanatory. It's like true or false. That's all you have. Hopefully this is making sense. So the next thing I want to talk about is null and undefined. I kind of grouped these together, but let's go with null. All right, it's a couple things about null. So whenever you create a variable and you set it to null, you're intentionally setting it to a value that is like empty, we would say. Okay, there's no real value to it, but it's just null. Now, one thing that I want to mention is whenever I do the type of null, you would expect it to be the type of null, but it's not the case. The type actually returns object, which actually is a bug in JavaScript. So if you guys are ever wanting to see if something like this is a type of object, to be safe, if you guys do work with nulls in your code, which some of you may decide not to, may not even want to work with them, but you may be forced to work with them in a code base that's shared with other developers, then what I would suggest is do this. Make sure that the object is not null, and then you can use this to make sure that you are truly working with an object and not null. Okay, perfect. So that's null, and that's the kind of the explanation there. And one thing I want to add is when you're working with nulls, sometimes you'll end up working with bugs. You'll end up causing bugs that you may have no idea about could be there. And the reason that I just mentioned was because the type of as object. So what I want to show you here as an example is, let's just say you simply have this, and then you want to say, okay, now I know this is let's do test here. Okay, I know I'm working with an object. Okay. So what I will do here is call this method that has own property, which is a common one, to see if the key exists. Okay. It's going to throw an error. So that's exactly, the problem with working with null sometimes. And, you don't want to access any property that doesn't exist on a variable because it will throw an error. Cool. If you guys have any questions or doubts on these, or any further comments you want to add, please do mention them in the comments. The next thing I want to talk about is undefined. Whenever we work with undefined, I'm going to set this. You can explicitly set it like this, okay? And then if I do type of test, it'll return you the type, which is undefined. Now, with null and undefined, like how I explained with true and false, there's only one of these that exist in our universe. One value, one null and one undefined. There's not multiple. So if I create multiple variables and point them to undefined, it's only pointing to that one undefined or null. Okay, and the reason that we use undefined is for intentionally leaving it as an empty value. Or sorry, unintentionally leaving it, not intentionally. That's what null is for, when you intentionally leave it as empty. And undefined is more unintentional, which also can lead to bugs, and why a lot of people don't like to work with it. Undefined and null really sometimes causes you to add more code than you need to protect yourself from bugs. So another way to create an undefined variable is like this. So if I do this, I think I already had it set, let me see, to true. Okay, let me do another one. Okay, let's make sure this is undefined. If I do the undefined here, okay, cool. And you don't actually need to oh my goodness, guys, sorry. It should be like this. Type of test4, undefined. And you don't need to have parentheses. Now what you do need to have parentheses around is this, when you have a function like this. It'll throw an error, and you need to wrap it around parentheses, okay? And then that'll work. Cool. Now notice how I didn't mention objects, functions, arrays. That's because they're not primitive values. And I'm going to create another video about that, going into details about that and some of the things that I learned from the module that were in the Just JavaScript book. I think that's really it, guys. Okay, so just a quick recap. A lot of the concepts that I learned that I showed you guys were because of this book. It helped me rebuild my mental model from the inside out. So if you guys are interested in buying this book, I would highly recommend it. I have, about 3 years of professional software development experience, and I've been using JavaScript professionally and just for my own fun projects for learning. It's really helped me build my mental models, the fundamentals so strong that I feel a lot more confident when I read code. This book isn't really there to help you to write better code or anything like that. It's help you to understand code and how it works and how to read it. Okay, what really happens behind the scenes. I think it's really great for if you wanted to kind of, whenever there's a bug and you're reading through the code, you might be able to find it a lot easier. Yeah, so if you guys like this video, please do like it. I just really want to spread this information and kind of fill some knowledge gaps that you guys may have that I had myself. If you guys do like these kind of videos, please do subscribe to the channel for more. I will create more videos like this just on JavaScript basics. Please let me know what you thought of this video, if it was helpful, if there's anything I can do better to present this information. let me know if you have any questions about the Just JavaScript book too. I'd love to even talk about it with you guys if you have read about it. So thank you guys so much for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.